Xi's September 3, 2025, Victory Day Parade, featuring DF-61 missiles and allies like Putin and Kim Jong-un, projects a China-led global order via the SCO, BRI, and GCI, challenging U.S. dominance. Yet there is little chance for this vision to take shape, and it's not merely about Xi's personal health or even the sustainability of the CCP regime. The real obstacle is a deeper, fast-emerging crisis that is often overlooked: China's unprecedented demographic collapse. The world has watched China's economic ascent with a mixture of awe and apprehension, but a far more insidious crisis is now unfolding within its borders: a demographic collapse of unprecedented scale and speed. For decades, the narrative was one of unstoppable growth, fueled by a seemingly endless supply of labor. Today, in 2025, that narrative has been irrevocably shattered. China is aging faster than it is getting rich, and its population is shrinking at an alarming rate. This is not merely a statistical curiosity, it represents the most severe demographic challenge in the modern world, a slow-motion catastrophe that threatens to undermine the nation's economic stability, social fabric, and global standing. The roots of this crisis are deep, tangled in a history of coercive state planning, and amplified by contemporary economic and political failures. Unlike other nations grappling with low birth rates, China's dilemma is a perfect storm of compounding factors. Its total fertility rate plummeted to a staggering 1.01 in 2024, far below the 2.1 needed to maintain a stable population. After peaking in 2021, the population has now fallen for 3 consecutive years, a trend that projections show is only accelerating. The United Nations forecasts a potential loss of over 200 million people by the mid-21st century. This abrupt demographic reversal is not a gentle decline but a precipitous fall, one for which the country is woefully unprepared. The consequences are already rippling through every corner of Chinese society, from empty maternity wards and shuttered schools, to a strained pension system and a shrinking workforce. The severity of China's situation becomes starkly clear when placed in a global context. While countries like Japan and many in Europe also face aging populations, they did so over a much longer period and after achieving high-income status. They had decades to build robust welfare states and automate their economies. China, in contrast, is confronting this crisis at a middle-income level, with a fragile economy and a threadbare social safety net. Its situation is uniquely dire because it lacks the traditional shock absorbers that other nations rely on, such as high levels of immigration or the political freedoms that foster trust between citizens and the state. The crisis is a uniquely Chinese one, born from its unique history and political system. As we delve into the anatomy of this crisis, 5 interconnected factors emerge as its primary drivers: a warped population structure, a sputtering economy, a weak welfare system, inadequate childbirth incentives, and a climate of political repression. Each of these elements alone would be a significant challenge. Together they create a vortex from which escape seems increasingly unlikely. The story of China's demographic crisis is not just about birth rates and dependency ratios. It is about the crushing weight of economic insecurity on young families, the profound distrust sown by decades of totalitarian control, and the failure of a state that once dictated the size of families to now persuade its people to have them at all. This is the story of a giant unraveling from within. The most immediate cause of China's demographic unraveling is its profoundly distorted population structure, a direct and brutal legacy of the one-child policy enacted from 1980 to 2015. This policy didn't just slow population growth, it hacked away at the very base of the demographic pyramid, creating a demographic cliff. In 2024, the consequences are starkly visible: a rapidly graying society built on a shrinking foundation of young people. Approximately 310 million people, or 22% of the population, are now over the age of 60, while a mere 17% are under 15. This imbalance means fewer workers are available to support a ballooning number of retirees, placing an unsustainable strain on public finances and family resources. The working-age population has been in decline for over a decade, a trend that is now accelerating into a freefall. This structural problem is far more acute in China than in its global peers. Japan is famously the world's oldest society, but its aging process was gradual, occurring over many decades of prosperity. China is experiencing a similar demographic shift, but at a compressed, breakneck speed, Furthermore, the one-child policy created a severe gender imbalance. A cultural preference for sons led to sex-selective abortions, resulting in a skewed ratio of 112 males for every 100 females at birth. This has created a marriage squeeze, where millions of men known as bare branches are unable to find partners, further suppressing family formation and birth rates. This man-made distortion is a uniquely Chinese feature that other aging nations do not share. Crucially, China lacks the demographic safety valve that has saved other countries, immigration. Nations like the United States, with a total fertility rate around 1.6, and Australia, with about 1.58, offset their low native birth rates with robust immigration programs, which constantly replenish their workforces and consumer bases. In stark contrast, China remains one of the most closed societies in the world, with a foreign-born population of less than 0.1%. Its political system and cultural insularity make a large-scale immigration program virtually impossible. Without this influx of new blood, there is no external mechanism to cushion the fall. The country must rely solely on its own shrinking pool of young people to drive its future. The human cost of this distorted structure is immense. A generation of only children, known as the 4-2-1 generation, now bears the heavy burden of caring for 2 parents and 4 grandparents. This immense pressure, combined with soaring living costs, makes the prospect of raising their own children seem financially and emotionally untenable. The one-child policy, designed to foster prosperity by limiting population, has instead created a society that is structurally incapable of regenerating itself. It has left a deep and lasting scar, a demographic wound from which the nation may never fully recover, setting it apart from any other country facing population decline. China's demographic crisis is colliding head-on with a severe and protracted economic downturn, creating a vicious cycle where economic anxiety crushes any nascent desire for larger families. For years, the implicit promise of the Chinese Communist Party was prosperity in exchange for political acquiescence. Now that promise is broken. The property sector, once the engine of middle-class wealth, is in a state of collapse, having erased an estimated $18 trillion in household wealth. With home prices plummeting and deflationary pressures mounting, consumer confidence has evaporated. The GDP growth rate, once in the double digits, slowed to a crawl of 2.4 to 2.8% in 2024, a pace that feels like a recession for a country accustomed to rapid expansion. This economic malaise makes the high cost of child-rearing an insurmountable obstacle for many young Chinese. The intense 996 work culture, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, leaves little time or energy for family life, while the costs of education and healthcare are astronomical. In China's hyper-competitive society, parents feel immense pressure to invest heavily in their one-child's future, a phenomenon born from the one-child policy era. This expectation of quality over quantity child-rearing has not dissipated with the new 3-child policy. It has only made the prospect of having a second or third child seem financially ruinous. High youth unemployment, hovering around 17.6%, further darkens the picture, as many young adults struggle to even secure their own financial footing, let alone start a family. Comparing China's economic pressures to other nations reveals its unique vulnerability. Japan, despite its own lost decades of economic stagnation, is a high-income, wealthy society with deep reserves and a strong social safety net. Its citizens do not face the same level of raw financial precarity as their Chinese counterparts. In the United States and Australia, while childcare is expensive, stronger consumer economies, higher wages, and greater job mobility provide more financial resilience. India, though a lower-income country, benefits from a demographic dividend of a young, growing population and a high-growth economy, which creates a sense of optimism that is now absent in China. The result is a society where personal aspirations are shrinking. Many young urbanites are opting out of the rat race, embracing philosophies of lying flat or tang ping, or choosing to lavish their affection and disposable income on pets instead of children. The pet economy is booming, a stark indicator of where a generation's priorities have shifted. They face the pressures of a developed world cost of living with developing world wages and social support, a combination that is toxic for fertility. A robust welfare state can act as a powerful buffer against demographic decline by reducing the financial and social burdens of raising children and caring for the elderly. China, however, lacks such a system. Its social safety net is a patchwork of underfunded and unequal programs that offer little real security to its citizens. While basic health insurance boasts near universal coverage, out-of-pocket costs remain stubbornly high, accounting for nearly 29% of healthcare expenditures. For rural residents, reimbursement rates are significantly lower than for their urban counterparts, creating a stark divide in access to care. This makes an unexpected illness a potential financial catastrophe for millions of families, discouraging them from taking on the added expense of children. The most significant structural barrier within China's welfare system is the Household Registration Program, or HUKU. This system ties access to public services like education, healthcare, and pensions to a person's official place of residence. For the approximately 243 million migrant workers who have moved from the countryside to power China's cities, this means they are treated as second-class citizens. They work in the city, but cannot access its schools for their children or its hospitals on equal terms. This systemic discrimination forces many migrant parents into heartbreaking choices, such as leaving their children behind in their home villages to be raised by grandparents, creating a generation of left-behind children and fracturing families. This reality stands in stark contrast to the comprehensive welfare states of countries like Denmark. In Denmark, with a total fertility rate around 1.4, generous parental leave, subsidized childcare, and free education and healthcare create an environment where having children is not a financial liability. The government actively supports families, recognizing them as a social good. Even Japan, while struggling with its own demographic issues, has a far more developed pension and healthcare system. The United States and Australia, despite having less comprehensive welfare systems than their European peers, still offer greater access to services and opportunities for social mobility than what is available to a migrant worker in China. China's pension system is another looming disaster. With the number of retirees swelling and the number of workers shrinking, the system is on a path to insolvency. Rural pensions are particularly meager, often amounting to just $20 to $30 a month, leaving the elderly almost entirely dependent on their children. In response, the government is gradually raising the retirement age, a deeply unpopular move that forces people to work longer while offering little in return. This weak and inequitable welfare state places the full burden of childcare and elder care squarely on the shoulders of individual families, making the decision to have more children a deeply irrational one for most. Faced with a demographic freefall, the Chinese government has belatedly shifted from coercion to persuasion, rolling out a series of pronatalist incentives. In 2016, the one-child policy was replaced with a two-child policy, and then, further relaxed to a three-child policy in 2021. Do you see the irony? Whether limiting births or encouraging them, the CCP never cedes the idea that reproduction belongs to the realm of policy. It's not about children per se. It's about reaffirming that the party is sovereign over the most intimate decisions in life. At first, these changes were not accompanied by financial subsidies, until 2025, when a national program was launched that offers an annual payment of 3,600 yuan, about $500, for each child under 3. So far, these efforts have been a spectacular failure. A state that once bragged about its control over population now finds itself powerless to raise fertility, even when it allows and encourages births. The numbers have continued to plummet, falling from 17.9 million in 2016 to just over 9 million in 2023. The brief uptick in 2024 is, honestly, largely attributed to the auspicious Year of the Dragon, a cultural blip that does little to alter the underlying trend. The core problem is that these incentives are, frankly, woefully inadequate. The national subsidy of $500 a year covers only a fraction, between 8 and 18%, of a family's annual childcare costs in a major city. This paltry sum is easily wiped out by a single expense, like the out-of-pocket cost for essential childhood vaccines. The government's focus on medical interventions, such as covering assisted reproductive technology under public insurance, is another example of a policy misfire. While it helps some couples struggling with infertility, experts agree that ART has a statistically insignificant impact on a nation's overall birth rate. These policies are really like using a garden hose to put out a forest fire. When compared internationally, the inadequacy of China's efforts is even more glaring. Japan, for instance, provides families with benefits worth approximately $7,000 per year, including cash allowances and subsidized daycare. Denmark offers even more, with direct support and services valued at around $7,500 annually. These countries understand that meaningfully influencing family planning decisions requires a substantial and long-term financial commitment from the state. China's subsidies, by contrast, feel like a token gesture, doing little to shift the economic calculus for prospective parents who face overwhelming costs for housing, education, and healthcare. Moreover, these policies are often implemented with a gendered bias that reinforces the patriarchal norms holding women back. Unmarried women are legally barred from freezing their eggs, a right available to single men, and surrogacy is completely banned. The state's messaging often places the responsibility for fixing the demographic crisis squarely on women's shoulders, without addressing the systemic issues that make motherhood a career-ending penalty for many. The incentives fail not just because they are too small, but because they are disconnected from the social and economic realities that young Chinese people, particularly women, face every day. They are a top-down solution to a bottom-up problem of lost hope and economic precarity. Beyond the economic and structural factors, a deep-seated political reality is poisoning the well of childbirth in China, pervasive state control, and the resulting societal disillusionment. The Chinese Communist Party's totalitarian grip touches every aspect of life, and its heavy-handed approach has fostered a profound sense of cynicism and distrust, particularly among the educated urban youth. The brutal months-long COVID-19 lockdown in Shanghai in 2022 was a watershed moment. The experience of being forcibly confined, facing food shortages, and being subject to the arbitrary whims of the state radicalized many, leading to the viral sentiment, "We are the last generation." This was not just a complaint, it was a political statement of passive resistance, a refusal to bring children into a world governed by such a regime. This political climate creates a powerful anti-natalist headwind that does not exist in other aging countries. In stable democracies like Japan, Denmark, or Australia, citizens may disagree with government policies, but they do not live in fear of the state itself. They enjoy fundamental freedoms of speech, assembly, and information, which fosters a baseline of trust and social cohesion. In China, the state's constant surveillance, censorship of information, and suppression of dissent create an atmosphere of anxiety. For many young people, the decision not to have children is a quiet rebellion, a way to protect a future generation from a political system they feel is oppressive and unpredictable. The legacy of the one-child policy casts a long and dark shadow over the government's current pronatalist push. For decades, the state brutally enforced birth limits through forced abortions, sterilizations, and ruinous fines. Women's bodies were treated as instruments of state policy, a demographic tap to be turned off. Now the same state that inflicted this trauma is pleading with its citizens to have more babies. This history has created a deep societal distrust of the government's motives. Many citizens, especially women, are skeptical of the new policies, viewing them as another attempt to instrumentalize their bodies for the goals of the state, simply turning the tap back on. This combination of historical trauma and present-day repression makes China's demographic challenge unique. While South Korea has a lower TFR, 0.72, its crisis unfolds within a vibrant, albeit high-pressure democracy. Its people are not motivated by a fundamental disillusionment with their political system. In China, the CCP's obsession with control has become its own worst enemy. By prioritizing political stability and public security, with spending on the latter far exceeding childcare subsidies, the regime stifles the very hope, freedom, and personal security that are the essential preconditions for families to feel confident about bringing new life into the world. When China's demographic crisis is placed side by side with the challenges faced by other nations, its unique severity becomes undeniable. It is a crisis defined by its colossal scale, its dizzying speed, and a toxic mix of economic fragility and political rigidity that other countries do not share. No other nation in modern history has had to confront a demographic implosion of this magnitude, a potential loss of hundreds of millions of people within a single lifetime. The sheer numbers involved mean that the consequences, both domestic and global, will be far greater than those stemming from population decline in smaller countries. Consider Japan, often cited as the primary example of an aging society. Japan's TFR is low, 1.26, and it is the oldest country on Earth. However, its decline was gradual, unfolding over more than half a century. This gave it time to adapt. As a high-income, technologically advanced democracy, Japan invested heavily in a robust welfare system, world-class healthcare, and automation to mitigate labor shortages. It is a society managing its decline from a position of wealth and stability. China, by contrast, is aging at a speed 4 times faster than Japan did, and it is doing so before becoming a truly developed, high-income nation. It has the demographic disease of a rich country with the institutional capacity of a middle-income one. Now look to the Anglosphere. The United States and Australia have successfully used high levels of immigration as a demographic lifeline, continuously rejuvenating their workforces and economies. Their open, multicultural societies attract talent from around the world. This path is closed to China, which remains deeply insular and has no political or social framework to absorb large numbers of immigrants. Meanwhile, a country like Denmark demonstrates the power of a proactive, family-friendly welfare state. Its comprehensive support system makes it one of the best places in the world to be a parent, keeping its fertility rate relatively stable and cushioning families from economic hardship. China's welfare system, hobbled by the hukou system and chronic underfunding, offers no such protection. Finally, the comparison with India is perhaps the most telling. India is set to become the world's most populous nation and is currently reaping a demographic dividend from its young and growing population. While it faces its own significant challenges, including a weak welfare system, its demographic trajectory is one of ascent, not decline. Its youthful energy fuels economic growth and a sense of national optimism. China is on the opposite path, its demographic dividends spent and its future clouded by decline. Even South Korea, with the world's lowest TFR, is a small, wealthy, and highly adaptive democracy of 51 million. China must manage this crisis for a population of 1.4 billion, under an inflexible political system, making its challenge an order of magnitude more difficult. The Chinese government's response to its demographic crisis has been a case of treating the symptoms while ignoring the disease. The current policies, from paltry cash subsidies to the promotion of reproductive technologies, are fundamentally misaligned with the root causes of the problem. They operate on the flawed assumption that the decision to have children is a simple economic transaction that can be nudged with minor financial incentives. This approach completely fails to grasp the profound societal shifts and deep-seated anxieties that are truly driving the decline in births. The crisis is not the result of a temporary lack of cash, but a permanent loss of confidence in the future. The government's priorities are clearly revealed in its budget. In 2025, spending on public security and state control continues to dwarf investments in family welfare. The estimated $12.6 billion allocated for national childcare subsidies is a pittance compared to the more than $200 billion spent on domestic surveillance, policing, and maintaining the stability of the regime. This reveals a government that is more afraid of its own people than it is of demographic collapse. It prioritizes control over care, repression over support. As long as this remains the case, no amount of pronatalist propaganda or minor subsidies will convince young people to have children. They are being asked to invest in a future that the state itself seems to be investing against. The failure to address deep structural barriers is another critical flaw. The hukou system remains firmly in place, continuing to penalize millions of migrant workers and their families. Gender inequality persists, with women bearing the brunt of childcare responsibilities and facing career discrimination if they become mothers. The intense pressure of the education system and the 996 work culture go unchallenged. The government is attempting to graft a pronatalist policy onto a society whose economic and social structures are inherently anti-natalist. It is like asking flowers to grow in toxic soil without any attempt to clean the contamination. Ultimately, the current policy framework is destined to fail because it is constrained by the political ideology of the Chinese Communist Party. Truly effective reforms would require a radical reorientation of state priorities. It would mean empowering individuals over the state, building a genuine social safety net that gives families real security, dismantling discriminatory systems like the hukou, and fostering a climate of freedom and hope. Such reforms would necessitate a level of political liberalization and a redistribution of power that the current regime views as an existential threat. The government is trapped, unable to implement the very changes that could save the country from its demographic fate. China's demographic crisis is, without hyperbole, the most severe and complex in the modern world. It is not merely an issue of a low birth rate, it is a full-blown societal reckoning, born from a unique convergence of a distorted population structure, a fragile economy, a broken welfare system, and a repressive political climate. The scale of its 1.4 billion population means the fallout will be monumental, dwarfing the challenges faced by smaller nations like Japan or South Korea. The speed of its aging, a direct consequence of the one-child policy, has left it with little time to prepare, forcing it to confront a rich country's problem with a middle-income country's resources. The comparisons to other nations lay this reality bare. Unlike the United States or Australia, China cannot use immigration to replenish its workforce. Unlike Denmark, it lacks the comprehensive and humane welfare state that makes child-rearing a supported and collective endeavor. Unlike Japan, it did not have decades of prosperity to build a cushion of wealth and technology before the demographic winter set in. And, unlike India, it faces a future of contraction, not growth. Most critically, unlike any of these other nations, its crisis is amplified by a deep and pervasive trust deficit between the people and a state that once brutally limited their reproductive rights and now presides over a system that stifles their freedoms and economic prospects. The Chinese government's current approach of offering small, inadequate subsidies is a profound misreading of the situation. It fails to address the crushing costs of housing and education, the career penalties faced by mothers, and the pervasive sense of disillusionment among the young. These are not problems that can be solved with a few $100s a year. For any meaningful improvement to occur, China would need to undertake radical reforms that are currently deemed impossible under the existing political system. This would include building a true social safety net, dismantling the discriminatory hukou system, enforcing gender equality in the workplace, and, most importantly, allowing for the political and social freedoms that cultivate hope and trust in the future. Without these changes, China is locked on a trajectory toward a demographic and economic stagnation that will reshape its destiny and the global order. The September 3, 2025 Victory Day parade was staged to project China's military strength and Xi Jinping's claim to global leadership. Yet the irony is fourfold. First, the very premise of the celebration is dubious. The Chinese Communist Party did not lead the fight against Japan in World War II, and its right to claim victory remains historically questionable. Second, the attendance of Kuomintang officials was an act of political theater that not only endorsed the CCP's false narrative of resisting Japan, but also undercut Taiwan's dignity at a time when Beijing's stance toward the island is openly hostile. Third, Vladimir Putin, a man wanted for war crimes, stood on the reviewing stand to commemorate victory in a war against fascism. And fourth, Xi invoked that victory even as his own regime increasingly mirrors the very features of fascism: a one-man cult, mass surveillance, ethnic persecution, militarized propaganda, and an ideology that subordinates every sphere of life to party control, completing the spectacle's absurdity. Beyond that absurd theater, Xi's grand project of a new world order is running out of time. China's population is aging at record speed. The median age is projected to reach 50 by 2050. The workforce already shrank by 5% between 2011 and 2020. Experts call this the fastest population contraction in human history. Marriage rates are collapsing by more than 20% each year, and instead of prioritizing support for families, Beijing spent on a single parade the equivalent of 40% of its entire annual childbirth subsidy, a telling measure of which priority carries more weight in Xi's mind. The same distorted priorities appear in China's budget. Domestic security spending, estimated at $250 to $300 billion on par with the military, shows a state more intent on controlling its people than sustaining them. Here lies the central paradox: the survival of the Chinese nation requires loosening control and granting more freedom, but the survival of the Communist Party requires the opposite. What would keep the nation alive would end the regime. What keeps the regime alive is killing the nation. The CCP has made its choice, buying itself time while solving nothing. The September 3rd parade was therefore not a vision of strength, but the funeral march of Xi's New World Order, doomed before its birth.